Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 379, Your Victory Over Non-Conformance, Part 1, How the Power of Conformance Builds Off the Power of Trust. The podcast objectives are: reveal why there is no spiritual benefit to sharing in the sins of others, analyze the relationship between trust and conformance, and review the downfall of those who question Elohim. This lesson contains timelines and other visuals. Therefore, if you are listening to the podcast, I advise you to watch the video version on our website or YouTube, or request a PDF of the lesson so you can add the visual effect. In every way, you lose. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 155 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we analyze the primary objective of conformance, that is, to follow all the rules of holiness. We ended that podcast analyzing the difficulty in group conformance, and we came to a crucial conclusion, which I will offer as an early inflection point in this lesson. If you didn't bookmark it then, you know what to do. Per the spiritual model of sin by association, you are guilty of the transactions of non-conformance within the assemblies you are in and the spiritual company you keep. In these scenarios, those who are guilty by association are unwilling to call out the sin in their midst for a myriad of reasons. And yet, the most common reason is because they are benefiting from the one transacting the sin. Here lies the inflection and the great irony of this prevalent spiritual example of depraved indifference. To wit, there is no spiritual benefit in sharing in the sins of others, for in the end and after all, you will all inherit endless death. Notwithstanding, there are often physical benefits involved. Vis-a-vis, many will ignore the sins of others, especially their leaders, because there is some carnal benefit, often in the form of money. And this is to be expected. Listen to me. These spiritual lowlives have no power with Elohim, which is why they cannot lawfully obtain their desires through the spiritual means the Father has put in place for us to receive all things according to his will. Therefore, they are more than inclined to give their consent to the transaction of disobedience if they perceive they can benefit from the transgressor by covering his or her sin. And Yahuwah is not in any of it. And although you might think this is not commonplace in the extended nation of Israel, brothers and sisters, you must believe me, this happens all the time. The lay people are blackmailing their leaders, and the leaders are ravishing their flocks. Trust me, if you think this is bad, it's even worse, and for everyone involved. For it is a true saying, there is no honor amongst thieves. And so, if you are in an assembly where the people are given to turning a blind eye, you are in the company of spiritual miscreants and you best look for the door. And if Yahuwah was ever dealing with these people, you better think twice because he isn't dealing with them anymore. So take my advice and invest the time to truly know those who are laboring amongst us. Take the time to determine who is who. For look, listen, if you are found guilty of sin by association, there is no benefit, for in every way you will surely lose. Have we obeyed his voice? Now, these things being what they are, it should be quite clear how deadly nonconformance is to our spiritual health. And thus, we must move forward with our remit. We must analyze how conformance eliminates nonconformance the same way we analyze how compliance defeated noncompliance. We should start by considering the table to the right, recapping what we have learned about conformance. The primary objective of conformance is to follow every rule of holiness. And by definition, conformance is action in accord with a prevailing standard, attitude, or practice, correspondence in form, nature, or character. Now, both the definition and the primary objective of conformance reveal a key attribute of this focal degree that is not associated with trust, i.e., the foundation of conformance. And yet, it is front and center in our battles with nonconformance. Consider this. Whereas we encounter a knowledge and understanding gap at the level of trust, we do not encounter this gap at the interval of conformance, for the gap has been bridged. Now, the question of the hour then is, how was this gap bridged? The answer is sure, and we have analyzed it in prior podcasts. This gap was bridged by trust. Remember, trust is the mental bridge of holiness that connects your planning and execution zones. Therefore, when you master trust via your mastery of conformance, an amazing thing happens, which I will offer as an interest point. After you unlock the mental bridge of trust and you give yourself to planning in accordance with the Father's will, your knowledge and understanding of the Father's will increases. Not only this, but your confidence in the process also increases. For your mental bridge will get stronger every time you follow the rules of holiness, which is the primary objective of conformance. This is why I use the example of the 10 lepers when analyzing how trust defeats distrust. Vis-a-vis, the same way the 10 lepers were healed as they went to show themselves to the priest. We experience spiritual growth and healing every time we conform to the Father's will. Now, this speaks to the revelatory nature of the primary illustration of conformance in our quest, vis-a-vis the railing system of holiness. If you recall, the railing system is dynamic in nature. To wit, it is formed as you conform to the Father's will. In the case of the 10 lepers, their healing became their reality as they walked in conformance. And as Elohim is the same yesterday, today, and forever, we have encountered our next inflection point. The primary reason why many within the extended nation of Israel are not being healed is because they are not walking in conformance. It's because they are not guarding the commands of Elohim. Brothers and sisters, we see the pattern before our eyes. These 10 lepers were not healed because they were descendants of Jacob. They were healed because they obeyed the command of Yahushua, Messiah. This truth begs the question, would they have been healed if they did not obey the command? The answer, of course not, and neither will you or me. Remember, the railing system of conformance is designed to keep you in the way of holiness, for this is where all the blessings, healings, and miracles abide. As for nonconformance, it is a treasonous virus that is designed to pull you out of the way of holiness to prevent the Father's will of good from transpiring in your life. So take my advice and be like the 10 lepers. Don't be proud. You're worse off than you think. And no one cares what you think or what I think. All that matters is what Yahuwah has commanded, and if we have obeyed his voice. When you don't have the details. Now, the sum of these matters reveals why you must follow every rule of holiness, even when you don't have all the details. As the saying goes, the devil is in the details. That is to say, the enemy wants you to focus on the details you don't have in order to initiate the progression of disobedience and doubt with the questioning. Now, I'm not saying it is evil to ask the Father a question, not at all. However, I am saying it is evil to question Elohim. There's a difference. And many times, the immature amongst us will not appreciate that difference. Ergo, they will transition from asking the Father a question to questioning the Father and his ability to do what he said he would do, because they can't see how it will happen. Here lies the inflection and the problem. To wit, those who follow this debased path will never conform to the Father's will. We know this because conformance is the primary application of trust. Ergo, where there is no trust, there can be no conformance. My dear friends, this is yet another testament to the line upon line approach to perfecting holiness. Vis-a-vis, it is impossible for us to conform to the Father's will if we don't first learn how to trust the Father. Trust me, many claim to trust him, but when it comes down to it, when the tests and trials come and they must prove their trust, they will fold. Listen to me. It's one thing to say you trust Elohim, and it's another thing to walk into a fiery furnace, which is how the word of truth describes our tests and trials. And yet, those who do find the strength to walk into the fire on behalf of Elohim will find they are not alone. Rather, there will be another who enters the fire with them, a friend who sticks closer than a brother, and likened unto the Son of Elohim. Therefore, you must always be careful not to start down the path where you are questioning Elohim, for it leads to nonconformance and a sore evil. And we will discuss these in the upcoming podcast as we continue our analysis of how conformance eliminates the spiritual virus of nonconformance. Now, here is the final word. The Father has given us all a choice, and I choose to obey his voice. Brothers and sisters, my prayer is that you also choose to obey his voice. And if you do, you must never forget the relationship between trust and conformance. Remember, as conformance is the primary application of trust, both degrees are designed to prevent us from entering the second phase of doubt and disobedience. Enter withdrawal. This is precisely why conformance is the railing system of holiness. It's because conformance is designed to prevent you from withdrawing from the Father's goodwill. And yet, you will never stay within the boundaries of the spiritual railing system if your spiritual walk is not being governed by an unyielding trust in the Most High Elohim. So, take my advice, and this is a must. Before you try to conform, first learn how to trust. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the degrees of trust you have in the Father and his will for your life. You can easily determine this by considering if you are failing or struggling to guard any of the commands of Elohim. If you're not, that's great. The next podcast will be a refresher for you and a detailed accounting of a work you have already completed. On the other hand, if you are struggling with conformance, ask yourself the following question. If I trust Yahuwah, then why won't I follow his rules? More than likely, you don't trust many men and women outside the renewed nation of Israel. And yet, you are following their rules. And so, why won't you follow Yahuwah's rule? Meditate on that question until the Spirit speaks to you. And when he does, you must act. You must take the next step. And if you need any help in the process, you know what to do. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 379, Your Victory Over Nonconformance, Part 1. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 380, Your Victory Over Nonconformance, Part 2. I will post this podcast on Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.